Good afternoon and evening, everyone, and thankful for you tuning in and continuing to be a part of our study of the book of Esther. Before we begin this evening's lesson, for our 3rd through 6th graders, we do have a couple of questions for you to check in with them to see if they've been paying attention, tuning in, perhaps even reading along. And these are from Esther chapter 7. In Esther chapter 7, what did the king offer to Esther if she wished for it? There was something specific that the king said she could have up to this if she wished for it. Number 2, where did the king go when he heard of Haman's evil plan? If you remember, they were having a meal together when Esther revealed what Haman was actually planning and plotting to do. And the king removed himself from that room and went to a different place. Where did he go? And then number 3, who were the gallows built by Haman and his people? Who were the gallows originally planned for? All right. We move into Esther chapter 8, and this is sort of the aftermath, I suppose, is what the way we would sort of term it. After Esther has brought forth this plan and she has revealed it to be Haman's plan to eradicate not only the Jewish people of the country, but she would be included in that. And so she made sure to express that to the king. And so Esther 8 is sort of, again, the aftermath of this conversation. If you remember sort of where chapter 7 leaves off, Haman is trying to figure out a way to beg for his life. He has gone to Esther, and if you remember, and we sort of talked about how it's kind of getting what you deserve, I guess, is the king turns around, sees Haman sitting on the couch where Esther was, sort of falling on that couch to beg for mercy, and he thinks that Haman is trying to attack Esther, and so that just hastens the execution that takes place there in Esther chapter 7 and verse 10. We talked about how sad that is and how disturbing it is that someone could be so absorbed with something that it takes even their most base of understanding about morality. I mean, seriously, the taking of one's life, someone else's life, just it seems harsh for us as we read that to think Haman could be so nonchalant. That's the word I'm looking for. Haman could be so nonchalant in his discussions with Ahasuerus about just eradicating an entire group of people. And that's what makes Esther 7 and verse 10, that's one of the reasons why it's so sad, is because when you get there to the end, there's no way he can apply for mercy to Esther in that moment because of the way he has acted and treated her people. And so you read the end of chapter 7 and you realize, okay, so if we were looking at this in sort of the Hollywood type method, that would be the place to end the movie, is Haman gets what he deserves and sort of you roll credits. Well, the problem with that idea is there is a lot of work that has to be done now to undo the evil that has been plotted and carried out by Haman. Again, you know this to be true. There were no cell phones certainly back then. There was no easy way to communicate with someone outside of your city walls. So that's where we sort of pick up with Esther 8. It's a nice scene, I guess. The bad guy gets what's coming to him, and Esther has saved her people, except she hasn't. She hasn't yet. She has proven that Haman is the mastermind behind this evil plot, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And so Esther chapter 8 is very important for the rest of this account, the rest of this story about Esther. So let's begin with verse 1. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to him. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet, wept, and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. When the king held out the golden scepter to Esther, Esther rose and stood before the king. So let's pause just for a moment here in these first 4 verses. The thing that you notice immediately is that Mordecai is finally given the recognition that he had earned by his doing what was right, regardless of time and circumstance and situation. He has consistently been someone that does what's right, even if it means perhaps some kind of trouble for him, or even if it means that there might be someone who would be upset with him. And in his earlier case, where he prevented an assassination attempt on the king, let's truly be honest about it. The king did not care for the people, so why should the people care for the king? And in Mordecai's case, he didn't see it that way. He saw it as something that was going to happen that was wrong, therefore he stood up for it. And here in Esther chapter 8, we see him getting some of the due that he deserves. But also the second thing that you notice is Esther realizes very quickly that the plot is still in motion. Verse 3 there, she says, look, we've got to find a way to put this plot to an end. Verse 5, she said, if it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if the thing seems right before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, which he wrote, to destroy the Jews who are in all the provinces of the king. For how can I bear to see the calamity that is coming to my people, or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred? Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman. They have hanged him on the gallows because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. But you may write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring, for an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. Okay, so we made comment concerning the growth shown by Ahasuerus previously, and we see that, again, he has grown, he has moved forward, he has become something more, I guess we would say, and this sounds insulting, I guess it is, but he has become more human as time has gone on. He has learned to sort of care for people instead of just brushing them off, but yet it is still his issue here, verse 8, that truthfully he doesn't really care about the group known that he's referring to here as the Jews. You may write as you please. Again, it's not that he is throwing this off. It's just, to him, this is not that important. But he does see, again, we're showing growth here. He does see in the eyes of Queen Esther and in the eyes of Mordecai that this really matters. And so therefore he gives them the authority of the king, just as he had done with Haman. And don't lose sight of that. That's why we say it's not that he's fully become some wonderful human being who is compassionate and caring. No, that's not it. He had basically made this exact same speech to Haman earlier for Haman to execute this plot. But we are showing growth in the sense that this does show at least that he is allowing Esther and Mordecai. It does show at least a small degree, a very small degree of growth. Verse 9, the king's scribes were summoned at that time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day. And an edict was written, according to all that Mordecai commanded concerning the Jews, to the satraps and the governors, the officials of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to each province in its own script, to each people in its own language, and also to the Jews in their script and their language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, and sealed it with the king's signet ring. Then he sent the letters by mounted couriers riding on swift horses that were used in the king's service, bred from the royal stud, saying that the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, children and women included, and to plunder their goods, on one day throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Okay, let's pause just for a second. It's a lot of reading there. The general point is that it's going to take a long time to get to every part of the kingdom. You look back here, let's see, verse 9, the 3rd month. Well, this is not going to take place until the 12th month. You're looking at approximately 9 months of time But Esther is fearful, and so is Mordecai to a certain degree, that they're not going to have enough time. 9 months is just it's a long way for them to travel. You look at a map and you think about from India to Ethiopia, that these guys are traveling, trying to let people know. But again, the edict is that the Jews can defend themselves because on this one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, verse 12 of Esther chapter 8, that was when this was all supposed to take place. This mass execution of all the Jews was supposed to take place on the 13th day of the 12th month. And so here is Mordecai sending word on behalf of the king, and with his permission, with his power involved, that on that day, if someone tries to attack a group of Jews, those Jews are given the right to defend themselves. Whereas otherwise, according to Haman's edict, they would have had to have accepted their fate with no defense. So they're trying desperately to get the word out that no one is to abide by Haman's decree, but just in case maybe there's a group that refuses to listen to that, the Jews are being told through these decrees that they can defend themselves. Verse 13, a copy of what was written was to be issued as a decree in every province, being publicly displayed to all peoples, and the Jews were to be ready on that day to take vengeance on their enemies. So the couriers, mounted on their swift horses that were used in the king's service, rode out hurriedly, urged by the king's command, and the decree was issued in Susa the citadel. I want to point out one thing there in verse 14 that shows, again, just a tiny amount of growth. Whereas before, perhaps the king just didn't really care what was going on when it came to the Jews or when it came to really anybody else. Now, verse 14, we see just a baby step worth of growth here, as now not only has he given permission for them to send this word out, but now he's actually urging them to go, get there quickly, carry this message quickly. And so it's interesting just to see the influence that Esther and Mordecai have had on Ahasuerus. We've made this comment many, many times, but chapter 1, you see Ahasuerus really is just sort of a stone-faced chauvinist, one who doesn't really care for anybody other than himself. And by the time we now get to chapter 8, he is at least willing to open his ears and listen. He's at least willing to listen to the people that are talking to him. And he's at least showing some, even if it's tiny, some percentage of human kindness and human compassion. So the decree starts in Susa. Verse 15, Mordecai went out from the presence of the king. Listen to this. This is beautiful. In royal robes of blue and white, with a great golden crown and a robe of fine linen and purple, and the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and in every city, wherever the king's command and his edict reached, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many from the peoples of the country declared themselves Jews, for fear of the Jews had fallen on them. Let's just look at this from sort of, again, you look at this picture and you think, from where Mordecai started, as simply one who sort of watched over the gates, to now being one who is sharing the stage, as it were, with the king, with Ahasuerus. And I did want to point out there in verse 15 that the Jews are certainly excited. Verse 16 tells you that. Verse 17 tells you that. But don't overlook the end of verse 15. The city of Susa shouts and rejoices when they see Mordecai getting what he deserved, which is he had sown so many good deeds. He had sown so much goodness and kindness and compassion amongst the people in Susa, whether they were Jewish or not. He had done so much good, and honestly, without desiring to be given attention for it. He had done so much good that now the people of the city, not necessarily just the Jews, the people of the city are rejoicing at him getting what he deserves. So here's what you see, and I want to leave you with this. Here's what you see in this particular chapter of Esther, chapter 8. You see the will of God coming through. You see the will of God shining through. It's ultimately, the story of Esther is one that reveals how much God is working I do want you to notice, and this is sort of one of those common trivia facts that people talk about. The name of God is actually not mentioned in the book of Esther. And it's just one of those things, like I said, it's sort of like a piece of trivia that a lot of people have brought up maybe, or that you've heard before. But the name of God is technically not mentioned throughout the book of Esther. However, one cannot read the story of Esther, the book of Esther, and not see God's hand through the entirety of the story. It's an amazing thing, but it's also a very impactful thing, an influential thing, to see God at work, even if His name is not necessarily mentioned. In this case, here's what you find. Esther is simply just doing what is right. Mordecai is simply just doing what is right. And there are some bad things that befall them over the course of the story, and yet the will of God is to bring them through it. I used this on Tuesday night. Romans chapter 8 verse 28 is a perfect verse to apply to Esther and Mordecai. We know that all things work together for good for them that love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. That is Esther and Mordecai, in the sense that it's not always going to be pretty. It's not always going to be the best. Sometimes there are going to be some negative things that happen. But when someone trusts fully in the will of God, then they know, they are moved, and they understand that ultimately, whether it be on this earth or whether it be in eternity, God will work it out. And for Esther and Mordecai, I know that there were times that they were fearful, and they were scared, and they were nervous and anxious, and yet they continually just did the next right thing. We've used that phrase. I use it a lot with teams that I've coached in the past, or even with kids that I've worked with in classrooms, or even with adults, young people, young adults, married couples. Constantly, you just have to remind yourself that whatever's going on, it could be of some significant tragedy, perhaps even in your life, and literally the only thing you can do is the next right thing, whatever that is, whatever that may look like, however that may present itself, whatever the next right thing is, that's what you should do. And with Esther, you see it. You see her and Mordecai. It's just the next right thing. What's the next right thing that I need to do? And if I do the next right thing, then I know that I'm taking a step closer to God. And if I continue to take steps closer to God, then that ultimately is going to work things out no matter what. No matter what that looks like. Paul said it best. For me, to live is Christ and to die is gain. That sounds so crazy to us, but for one who is completely and totally devoted to the will of God, they understand it. And Esther certainly, Mordecai certainly fit in that category. We'll finish up chapter 9, and we'll probably include chapter 10 with chapter 9, because chapter 10 is very, very short, very brief, and it's basically just a sort of an epilogue about Mordecai. So we'll probably put those two chapters together tomorrow night and finish up this study of Esther tomorrow night. I appreciate you tuning in. Hope that you have a wonderful day, and we look forward to our study again tomorrow night.